Hi there, this is Ryan Kerrison, student number A160465. This is for the class Pop Theology and Pop Culture. Here we go. Hi there, this is your favourite movie review channel, Decaying Apples. Today I'm going to be reviewing Henry Bean's 2001 film, The Believer, winner of the Grand Jury Prize at Sundance Film Festival in 2001. This film is expressly not considered or identified as a case history film, however, was inspired when Bean was shown a New York Times story written by a reporter by the name of McCandish Phillips over 25 years ago. The story involved Phillips confronting 28-year-old Daniel Burroughs, formerly second in command of the American Nazi Party, and had strong affiliations with the KKK as well. Burroughs was confronted with compelling evidence that he was in fact a Jew. When Burroughs was confronted with this story, he threatened the reporter remarkably that if he published it, he would kill himself. And as the old saying goes, life truly is stranger than fiction. Burroughs committed suicide the same day the article was published. The film itself centers around a young Jewish-raised man who adopts a neo-Nazi and aggressively anti-Semitic philosophy. It follows his journey of searching for meaning in his Judaism-rooted life and his newfound beliefs. The Believer examines themes such as religion, identity, family, neo-Nazism, elements of fascism, anti-Semitism, and the very nature of God himself. The film was released a mere 4 months before 9/11, and so its reception was not exactly ideal. Alongside this being a factor, a rabbi by the name of Abraham Cooper from the Simon Wiesenthal Center for the Holocaust Studies condemned the film for being too offensive, even going so far as to describe it as a primer for anti-Semitism, which, if you see the film, and as I will address later, you may see why he would think so. The auteur Henry Bean was born in 1945, was raised as a conservative Jew in Philadelphia, ironically, maybe meaning the city of brotherly love. He is credited as an actor, a screenwriter, a novelist, and now a director with his directorial debut in The Believer. Not a lot is easily discoverable about Bean, as he is not a major director with any large film catalogue. However, through some of his interviews, he seems to have been in the process of working out his own convictions concerning Judaism, and it seems even working out through some of his own questions from his own childhood about the faith. Bean states in an interview that through the movie addressing the hurts from within the faith of assimilated Jews that they might have felt previously, Bean hopes that it clears the way for tender and more positive feelings. He cheekily commented that true Orthodox Jews rarely go to the cinema anyhow, so he doesn't see it as being a huge problem for the Jewish community. The film's form is a traditional narrative form film telling the straightforward story. However, one interesting note is the way in which it is filmed. There's a combination of handheld documentary-style camera work used to place the viewer more dramatic, and provide the viewer with a more dramatic experience and immersion within the film's narrative. One may suggest it's an attempt to emulate the investigative reporter-like inspiration of the film itself. The film unfolds in a linear fashion, but it's unclear in some points as to whether or not the events have just occurred or if the main protagonist is recollecting, but it doesn't really affect the plot or anything like viewer insight much at all. Interestingly, there is a few scenes of non-linear placement in which Danny is taking the place of a scene described to him by a Holocaust survivor during a sensitivity training program that his group and himself were sentenced to after an altercation. This survivor of the Holocaust had his son impaled by a Nazi soldier and was held up on the tip of a bayonet as the blood spilled on his face. Quite a shocking story, obviously, and it affects Danny. And throughout the film and its progression, Danny's perspective shifts and he takes the place of the Holocaust survivor himself. So this may suggest either an identity re-solidification as a persecuted Jew, or maybe just exemplifies his increasing empathy for the Jewish plight. The film's genre is pretty basic. It's an indie film. It's drama, maybe thriller if you really stretched it. The film's purpose and intent is quite clear. It's to highlight the plague of anti-Semitism. However, as a film critic, historian, and journalist Roger Ebert states, some fear the film could do more harm than good. And Gosling's character, Ryan Gosling, stars in the film, or doesn't star because no one knew him then. His character is so compelling, his oratory skills so articulate, his rhetoric so convincing that he seems to argue so logically with valid questioning and reasoning, and some fear that the audience is being trusted with too much. The film, at the very least, asks the questions some people may have, and does an adequate job of providing some answers, even if those answers are less than palatable. I'm going to lean on here from the user on the IMDb website, Joe Blogs. He provides a synopsis of the film I quite like. The Believer explores a Jewish student's Gosling, private journey to understanding the meaning of Judaism in his life. Set in New York City, the plot follows a morally confused young adult struggling with the conflict between his beliefs and his heritage. The Believer examines themes of religion, family, and self-loathing. It provides a psychological examination into the forces of intolerance, both on the individual and society as a whole. Danny joins a fascist group leaders played by Billy Zane and Teresa Russell, who are less than interested in Danny's rhetoric of anti-Semitism, but persuade him to win over people to their own agenda. He and the daughter of one of the leaders of the fascist group, a girl named Carla Mobius, played by Summer Phoenix, soon begin a strange romance. Carla is a sexual sadist, which I'm not sure why this is important. I'll explore further in her character profile later on. Danny is actually fueled by his perpetual rage and joins a gang of fellow anti-Semites who hatch a plan to commit an act of terrorism against the Jews, planning to detonate an explosive device in a synagogue. The plan has failed time after time. Some of the characters, I'll work through them now. Danny Balint, played by Ryan Gosling. Danny's our protagonist, serving also, as it seems, as our antagonist, adding only to the depiction of conflict and contradiction within his life. With an above-average IQ and an obvious intellect, Danny articulates a critique of the Jewish narrative ideology. Not the content of the narrative, rather the identification of the Jews themselves within a greater meta-narrative. He also offers a critique of Jewish sexuality, saying that in particular the women, Jewish women, say that they are unnaturally obsessed with oral sex and are insatiable, driven only by pleasure, and they live and behave in a primarily hedonistic way. Danny destabilizes all the identities he tries to fulfill from the Jewish identity. His high school friends, his shaven head, argumentative spirit, give him cause to be unsettled by some of his perspectives, all the while when desecrating a synagogue. With his anti-Semitic gang, he requests to not desecrate the Torah, but it's ignored, and that creates further instability within his role as a neo-Nazi idealist. Jenny is living as a juxtaposition, a walking contradiction. It seems the more he pursues his obscenely racist terrorist plot, the more he seems to be compelled to study and honor his Jewish roots. Carla Mobius is played by Summer Phoenix. She plays a strange love interest of Danny. They develop a connection, but she is one of the few characters entrusted with the unadulterated contradiction of Danny's life. She questions his neo-Nazism when he speaks so much and knows so much about the Jews concerning, the tenets of the faith and such. In regards to her sexual sadism I mentioned earlier, maybe it's to reinforce the contradiction between Danny's growing affections for her and the contempt he feels for Jews overall as she becomes more interested in and even begins engaging in the practice of Judaism. Danny's father, another character, is played by Ronald Gutman. Danny's father is shown briefly in the film, but he is shown to be alongside Danny with his defiance on the Jewish Shabbat by watching television on, obviously, when they're not supposed to be, offering what appears to be a nod to the obscurity of the Jewish law. Another character is Rav Zingesser, played by Sig Leibowitz, the teacher from Danny's childhood and adolescence, reluctantly facilitates most of Danny's questioning of the Jewish faith, the reasoning and ultimately God's insatiable powers of power hungriness and daring him to smite him down in class. And it's from Leibowitz's character we hear the last words of the film: "Where are you going? Don't you know there's nobody up there?" The final nail that it gets hammered into the nihilistic coffin, encased in which is the body of Judaism itself. The music of this film, the score is largely primitive. Quick tempo, intensity is used for the action scenes and to establish pace and character intent. But when it's high stakes or violence is impending, happy, sad, sad, happy. Pretty not very notable use of music in this film. The mise en scène, I feel as though this movie's low budget did not allow Bean to consider too much the mise en scène. However, the lack of props and obviously cheaper non-studio lighting added to the audience acceptance of the character's relatability and the rawness and the reliability of the film being told as it maybe even it felt real. As if the film was just following the story of a neo-Nazi Jew living in New York. Some theological considerations. The most obvious one in the film is the critique of Judaism. No matter how good the logic is, Danny, it seems to betray Danny's intelligence. Defying God's chosen people is never a good decision. Danny argues that Judaism and its teachings are nihilistic and flawed. And he maintains that Isaac did not die on Mount Moriah. His literal interpretation of the Torah leads him to see God as a reckless, unloving being, going as so far as to call God the power-drunk madman and to realize God as the conceited bully that he truly is. He calls Judaism a sickness, a kind of nomadic wanderer with no roots, and so much so that they must universalize everything, stock market and film and all that sort of thing. He concludes in his monologue saying that Jews want nothing from nothing. Want nothing but nothingness, nothingness without end. What do these critiques mean? Here we go. Nihilism is the rejection of all religious and moral principles, often in the belief that life is meaningless. He draws this conclusion by commenting on the Jews' disregard for the Logos, thus the disregard of being, thus the embrace of nothingness. From this, one could say nihilism is essentially will inevitably result in violence, because violence is the only display of the arbitrary and autonomous will of a person. It's really the only way that the acting person can assert his existence, with the absence of logos in the world. Ironically, maybe, but poetically for sure, Danny is killed by his own device while reciting the Torah in the synagogue, which was planted by him and his gang to kill Jews. So in the end, Danny the Jew kills a Nazi, and while simultaneously Danny the Nazi succeeds in killing a Jew, even though it's himself. The final scene in which Danny is climbing the stairs of his old school, seeking God in heaven. Maybe it's an attempt at redemption. Maybe Danny hopes to find answers in the places he's been avoiding his whole early adult life. But to quote Bean here, these concerns, these issues must be aired in order to be demolished, referring here to the grievances Jews might have with their own faith. I mean, I can empathise with Bean's attempts here within the film, but I don't so much affirm his methodology. Critique of the film. I don't really believe Bean's film developed enough of a intellectual or even an emotional motivation for Danny's revolt against the Jewish faith. It seems disproportionate that what is portrayed as a teenage angst and theological disagreement with his rabbi should sequentially lead to what is displayed as full-on commitment to anti-Semitism. Aside from his childhood experiences, nothing else is really offered that might justify or at least contribute to Danny's ideology. For example, no pathological issues, nothing like family resentments or desire for disassociation present or addressed. I would have to agree with Ebert's sentiments that the charisma of Danny overpowers the message of the film. One has so easily demonstrated to that how acceptable it is to have contempt for the Jewish faith and its members. It's a very big trust game that Bean's played here, releasing this film in the way in which he has. Aside from the great performances and the story. But to equate Judaism to nihilism is, in my opinion, to miss the whole premise of the whole religion. The Jewish faith is looking to God for the Messiah, for the promise of deliverance and a final reconciliatory act from the divine providence of their God. They may have misidentified Jesus as that person to not fulfill the role, but that doesn't mean it's nihilistic. The critique that the Jews deny Jesus as Logos, however, may be interpreted as a dismissal of meaning altogether of life. But I think you'd be hard-pressed to find that is the case for most Orthodox Jews. This said, of course, doesn't even touch the topic of or consider the faith of Messianic Jews who live culturally as Jews and practice the tenets of the Jewish faith, but do hold to the Messiahship of Jesus Christ, the Nazarene. I give this film 4 out of 5 stars. Thanks for watching, guys, and talk soon.